18 years. That's how long I gave to Axis Tech. I walked through those sliding glass doors as a 26-year-old software engineer, freshly graduated and hungry to prove myself. I left those same doors, gray at the temples, carrying a cardboard box and a hollowed chest. Not even a goodbye lunch. Just a cold, sterile handshake from the VP of Operations and a printed termination letter folded twice. Cost optimization, they said. Nothing personal, Marcus. Nothing personal? I gave them half my life. I was there before we had client dashboards, before we moved to cloud infrastructure, before we were anything. I led the migration that saved us $2 million in licensing fees. I mentored half the dev team. My fingerprints were in every product update, every system deployment, every back-end innovation that made Axis Tech what it was. But I was too expensive. They didn't even let me finish the quarter. What hurt more than being fired was how quiet it was. No one fought for me. My team lead, Jim, the guy who used to call me Captain Reliability, just nodded with that awkward guilt in his eyes. HR had a preloaded script. And my boss, Craig? The same guy who said I was mission critical 3 months earlier? He never even looked up from his screen when I walked past his office with my box. I didn't raise a scene. I didn't beg. I walked out with the same quiet dignity that brought me in. But inside, I was shaking. The first week of unemployment felt like a funeral. I kept waking up at 6:15, my brain hardwired to check server reports and client tickets. But there was nothing to check anymore. I wasn't allowed on the internal systems. My Axis Tech email was gone before I even got home that Friday. 18 years, wiped like cached data. I had a little savings. Enough to keep the lights on. My wife, Marla, was supportive, though I saw the worry behind her eyes. We had 2 teenagers and a mortgage. I'd always been the provider. The rock. I applied for a few jobs that first week, but honestly, I wasn't ready. I needed time to grieve. I watched old webinars I'd presented. I reread my thank you emails from clients. I even dug up the photo from our 10-year anniversary party, the one where Craig handed me that stupid plaque. 10 years of relentless innovation, it said. Guess 10 years doesn't buy you much these days. 2 weeks after my termination, I got my first call from Axis Tech. Not a check-in. Not an apology. A technical emergency. It was Sandra from infrastructure. Her voice was tense. Hey, Marcus. Look, I know this is awkward, but we've hit a snag with the staging servers. The load balancer's acting up after the last patch. You're the only one who touched that config last. I paused. You mean the patch I warned them not to apply without isolating the Docker environments first? I asked, flatly. Yeah. That one. I closed my eyes. Of course. They'd ignored my documentation protocols. Probably let an intern roll the patch on production without validating containers. I'm not on payroll, Sandra, I said. I know. Craig said he'd approve a contractor fee if. No. Wait. I'll send you my rate card, I said, and hung up. 3 hours later, Craig called. Marcus, buddy, look, I know this is a weird situation. We were hoping you'd be willing to step in. Just this once. I let the silence hang. Just long enough for him to squirm. You fired me, Craig. It was never personal. You know how budgeting works. Do you remember what I told you during our last performance review? I asked. He sighed. That we were running fragile deployments. Critically fragile, I corrected. And that the new devs weren't trained properly. Well, they're learning, he said, trying to sound optimistic. I chuckled darkly. You don't train systems engineering on Slack threads. Marcus, please. We'll pay your consulting rate. Just help us through this patch. I paused. Then I said, double rate. And I get paid up front. He didn't argue. That weekend, I logged into a sandboxed client and took one look at the logs. It was worse than I thought. They'd bypassed the automated rollback I wrote 2 years ago, to streamline deployment, apparently. Half the containers were failing health checks. Requests were timing out. One of their enterprise clients, a bank, had a service outage they hadn't even noticed yet. By Sunday night, I'd stabilized the load balancer, rebuilt the faulty images, and restructured the config to make it idiot-proof. I sent them a report, billed them 16 hours at double my old hourly rate, and logged off. I should have felt satisfied. Vindicated. But all I felt was tired. Over the next month, They kept calling. System bugs. Integration breakdowns. Vendor issues. Turns out, when you remove the guy who built the system starts to shake. Every call was more desperate than the last. But each time, I raised my rate. I wasn't being vindictive. Just honest. You want the guy who can fix the machine blindfolded? You pay for the experience. They said I was too expensive. Now I was unaffordable. By the fourth emergency call, something clicked inside me. It wasn't pride. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. Axis Tech hadn't just let go of an employee. They'd amputated a limb. And now they were bleeding, scrambling to patch wounds with interns and hasty code merges. The same leadership that once praised me for always having a plan B was now realizing I had been the plan B all along. The latest crisis involved a failed API integration for one of their largest clients, a medical data aggregator. I built the original handshake protocols from scratch when we still called it Project Echo. They'd retooled it with a flashy third-party framework without even checking for backwards compatibility. Now half their endpoints were returning 502 errors, and the client was threatening to suspend the contract. I wasn't surprised when Craig called again. "Marcus, please. This is bad. Really bad." "How bad?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "Legal's involved. The client's calling it a breach of SLA. They've pulled access until it's fixed." "Interesting. When you removed me from the Echo documentation team, you said the knowledge transfer was complete." "That was a mistake," he admitted. "We miscalculated." I let the silence sit between us. There's something powerful about being the calm one in a storm someone else caused. "My rates tripled," I said. There was a beat of stunned quiet. "Marcus. No exceptions. And this time, I want 50% up front. You get what you pay for, remember?" He sighed. "Fine." 2 hours later, I was back in the belly of the beast, virtually, at least. The codebase looked like a battlefield. Forked APIs. Disjointed schemas. A jungle of third-party dependencies that nobody had documented. I didn't fix it immediately. I could have. But I didn't. I mapped out the issues, flagged the faulty modules, and created a step-by-step strategy, one that only I could follow quickly, because I knew the bones of this system. I knew what would snap if pulled wrong. And I knew what they feared most. Silence. So I sent a draft fix and told them I'd finish after the second half of my invoice cleared. It took 6 minutes for the transfer to go through. I started getting messages from former colleagues. "Dude, they're falling apart without you. Craig looks like he hasn't slept in a week. Remember the junior dev who always misspelled Docker? He's leading deployment now. LOL." They weren't mocking me anymore. They were apologizing in code. I never answered those messages. Not yet. A week later, I got a LinkedIn message from Alex Baines, a CTO I'd met at a cloud computing summit years ago. We'd shared a drink after a panel I spoke on about systems resiliency. "Marcus, heard you're consulting now. My team's scaling fast and needs someone who's been in the trenches. Interested?" I blinked at the message. Yes, I was interested. But I wasn't about to jump into another full-time grind for someone else's gain. Not again. Not without leverage. I proposed something different. "Let's talk architecture partnership. Strategic advisor role. 20 hours a week, 6-month retainer. My terms." He replied in under 10 minutes. "Deal. Send the paperwork." The difference between being an employee and being indispensable is simple: value is measured differently. When you're on payroll, they count every dollar you cost. When you're the only one who can fix the engine mid-flight, they stop asking questions. That realization changed me. Axis Tech became my first client, not my past. Within 6 weeks, I had 3 more clients, mid-sized startups scaling faster than their infrastructure could handle. I offered them what no one else could: engineering foresight, delivered with calm, tested wisdom. No buzzwords. No fluff. Just answers. And they paid. Because I'd earned the kind of credibility you can't fake. Craig called again in mid-March. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey, Marcus. We're restructuring again. Wondering if you'd consider coming back. Lead systems architect. Full-time. Stock options. Better package." I smiled as I leaned back in my chair. "Craig," I said slowly, I'm booked out for the next 4 months. And even if I weren't." He waited. "Why would I take a pay cut to fix your messes permanently when I'm getting paid triple to fix them temporarily?" He exhaled, defeated. "I had to try." "I know. Good luck, Craig." And I ended the call. There's something poetic about being cast aside, and then becoming the lighthouse others rely on to keep from crashing. I didn't chase revenge. I didn't seek glory. I just remembered who I was. 18 years taught me to build with precision, adapt with grace, and never let panic dictate strategy. Now, I build for me. And Axis Tech? They still call. But now they wait their turn. By April, I had a rhythm, 3 steady clients, 2 others in talks, and a 4th request that came in through a VC-backed firm whose DevOps guy quit mid-deployment. Word was spreading. Apparently, I had become the fixer. The odd thing was, I was doing less actual work than I had during my full-time job at Axis Tech. Back then, I had 20 Zoom calls a week and at least 3 crises simmering beneath the surface. Now? I logged in, solved precise, high-value problems, and logged out. Efficiency was my currency. Authority was my brand. And ironically, Axis Tech was still my largest client. They didn't call every day. But when they did, it was always the same. A tightly wound email or an after-hours voicemail from someone new in engineering leadership, trying to explain a tangled issue while pretending they weren't on the verge of panic. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt clean. Detached. I had become the ghost in their system, the phantom architect they couldn't replace, couldn't fully understand, and couldn't function without. One day, a message popped up from Kayla, a senior developer I had trained during her first internship 5 years ago. Kayla. "Hey Marcus. Not sure if I should be saying this, but just wanted you to know, they're finally doing an internal audit. DevOps leadership is freaking out. You left a lot more behind than anyone realized." I typed back. "Me. They should have read the documentation." She replied with a smiley face, then added, "We miss having someone who actually thinks long-term." That message stayed with me. Not because of the compliment, but because it confirmed what I'd always believed. You don't need to be loud to be remembered. You just need to leave systems that outlive you. One of my new clients, ArcLight Data, was a rocket ship startup. They were scaling at absurd speed, 30% user growth per month, 5 overlapping product branches, and a backend built like a patchwork quilt soaked in gasoline. The CTO, Monica, was sharp, the kind of leader who asked the right questions before a disaster hit. She reminded me of what Axis Tech used to be in the early days, raw, hungry, idealistic. She didn't care about age or titles, just results. We hit it off instantly. "Honestly, I don't care if you wear pajamas all day," she told me on our intro call. "If you can get our database sharding stable by the next investor meeting, I'll personally send you a cake." She kept her word. It was carrot cake. From Brooklyn. Incredible. But more than the cake, it was the respect that hit differently. No politics. No gatekeeping. Just mutual value. After 2 weeks, she offered to put me on a quarterly retainer. Not hourly. Not per project. "Just keep us ahead of the fire," she said. "Name your price." I named it. She said yes in under 5 seconds. I realized then, this is what I should have been doing years ago. Craig, meanwhile, was unraveling. I heard from 2 different ex-colleagues that Axis Tech's product roadmap was months behind. Their internal incident tracker had over 100 unresolved alerts. 2 senior engineers quit within the same week, and one of their biggest clients, the medical data group I'd saved earlier, was shopping for competitors. Then came the email. From Craig T. Morgan. Subject: Strategic Position Discussion. Date: Tuesday, 9:46 a.m. Marcus. I know things ended abruptly between us, but I'd like to extend an invitation. Axis Tech is considering a new executive-level role, VP of Engineering Operations. Competitive equity package, full autonomy, and a team of your choosing. Let me know if you're open to a conversation. Best. Craig. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to think carefully about the response I would enjoy the most. So, after 24 hours, I sent this. To Craig T. Morgan. Craig. I appreciate the offer. But I've found that I work best with people who recognize value before they lose it. My rate for temporary advisory remains available if needed. Regards. Marcus. I never heard back. That week, I took my wife and kids on a 4-day road trip up the coast. No laptops. No urgent calls. Just sand, air, and peace. My daughter asked why I smiled so much that weekend. I told her, because I finally remembered who I am. On the drive back, I got a call from Alex Baines, the CTO who first reached out after I left Axis Tech. Marcus, how would you feel about helping me build a team like yours? Scalable, remote first, no egos. Think, the anti-corporate tech structure. I laughed. You're offering me a startup? Not just a startup. A founder seat. Equity. Product influence. No HR layers. We're building from zero. I stared out at the winding road as he spoke, the wind rushing through the open window. For 18 years, I'd built someone else's dream. Now, someone was handing me the pen. I didn't say yes immediately to Alex's offer. Not because I didn't want it, but because I'd spent nearly 2 decades being reactionary, solving other people's emergencies. I wanted to be intentional this time. He was patient. That was a good sign. We set up a series of calls. Not interviews. Conversations. We talked architecture, culture, scalability. I asked tough questions. How hands-on did he expect me to be? Would I have authority to say no? What would failure look like? Alex answered each one without flinching. This isn't about hiring someone to work for me, he said. It's about building something with someone who sees what I don't. That line stuck with me. It was the first time since leaving Axis Tech that I felt like someone was inviting me into a partnership, not a transaction. Still, I didn't fully commit until I saw their codebase. Alex gave me access to the prototype's repo. It was a mess. Spaghetti logic. Redundant scripts. Asynchronous functions misfiring on overlapping triggers. It was clear the system had been patched together by well-meaning but overstretched devs, probably freelancers juggling multiple side gigs. But it had promise. Under the chaos, there was something alive. A heartbeat. It reminded me of Axis Tech in the early days, messy, overambitious, full of energy. Except this time, I'd be the one shaping the structure. I called him back 2 days later. I'm in, I said. But we're going to burn the back end down to the foundation. Alex just laughed. I already bought the gasoline. I spent the next few weeks architecting what would become our platform's nervous system. Clean, containerized services. Scalable databases with failover support. Bulletproof logging and graceful error handling. I didn't just want it to work, I wanted it to survive chaos. Outages. Pressure. That was the difference now. I wasn't building just for launch. I was building for longevity. This time, I wasn't answering to managers who only cared about release deadlines or client optics. I was building something I believed in, something that respected the user, the engineer, and the inevitable entropy of tech. I recruited 3 engineers I'd mentored years ago, ones who'd been burned by corporate politics like I had. We didn't talk about titles. We talked about principles. We worked lean. No fluff. Daily syncs, tight sprints, asynchronous updates when needed. I wrote design specs that actually got read. We built in public, not to chase clout, but to hold ourselves accountable. And in the background, Axis Tech kept calling. They were on their 3rd DevOps manager in 5 months. The latest, a guy named Ryan, emailed me directly. Subject: Need urgent help with kernel update compatibility. Hi Marcus. Sorry to bother you. We've hit a critical issue after a kernel update triggered a cascading failure in the legacy job scheduler. I've been told you designed the original version. Would you be willing to consult briefly? Name your terms. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I responded. Ryan. Thanks for reaching out. I can provide a fix and documentation to future-proof the scheduler, but I'll need full back-end access and a one-time fee of $12,000. Payment up front. Best. Marcus. He paid within 2 hours. It took me 6 hours to fix it. I spent the 7th hour writing documentation so clear a junior dev could follow it. Because I wanted them to finally learn. And because I had better things to do. Meanwhile, our startup, the one Alex and I co-founded, started gaining traction. Early adopters loved it. Not because it was flashy, but because it worked. It didn't crash. It didn't glitch. It handled stress like a system that had already been through hell, because in a way, I had. Investors noticed. A few reached out. Alex filtered them like a hawk, only looping me in when the conversations got serious. "You're not just the tech guy, Marcus," he told me one night on a late call. "You're the reason they trust we won't collapse after Series A." It hit me differently than praise ever had. Not "you're a genius." Not "we need you." But, "you make this resilient." That was my legacy. Not the code. Not the job titles. But the ability to build things that lasted. In May, I got one final call from Craig. Blocked number. But I knew it was him the moment I heard that tight, familiar breath. "Marcus. I know you probably don't want to hear from me." He sounded tired. Not angry. Not arrogant. Just defeated. "There's talk of acquisition. Numbers are bad. Clients are nervous. Board's nervous. I know we burned the bridge, but if you'd consider even a temporary return, I think we could stabilize long enough to." He trailed off. I could have said a lot. I could have told him how it felt to be treated like a cost. How humiliating it was to be erased by the company I helped build. How satisfying it was to now be worth more than ever. But I didn't. I simply said, "Craig, I wish you well." And I hung up. That night, I watched the sunset from the porch with Marla. She leaned against my shoulder, and we sat in silence. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "I think I'm finally done with that part of my life." She smiled. "You were never too expensive, you know." I laughed softly. "No. I was just too valuable for the wrong people." The next few months felt like building a cathedral. Not because of grandeur, but because of precision. Patience. Vision. Every line of code, every decision, every hire. It mattered. Alex and I named the company Keystone Layer, a nod to the one element in an arch that holds everything together, that bears the weight without being the biggest or the flashiest. Quietly essential. That's how I saw myself now. Not the centerpiece. The keystone. We weren't trying to go viral. We weren't chasing unicorn status. We were building something solid, a cloud-agnostic infrastructure platform that made deployment boring again. In the best way. No more fire drills, I told our beta clients. No more late-night rollbacks. Just stability. And they ate it up. It was strange to be at the helm. After years of responding to orders, having to justify every decision to people who couldn't code "Hello, world," now I was the one setting the rules, and the standards. We built in transparency. Code reviews were sacred, not a formality. We built in trust, no micromanaging, no productivity trackers. We built in flexibility, remote first, asynchronous friendly, outcome driven. It wasn't just the product I was rebuilding, it was the culture I'd wished for every single year of my career. And slowly, piece by piece, it started to attract the right people. One of the first engineers we hired, Jaya, had just left a toxic big tech environment. "I used to dread opening Slack," she said during our onboarding call. "Now, I feel like I'm allowed to breathe." I knew the feeling. She became one of our best contributors within a month, not because we pushed her, but because we trusted her. Freedom breeds excellence. We hit our first major milestone in August, 10 enterprise clients in pilot, 4 already signed to full contracts. Revenue was small but steady. Our churn rate? 0. I didn't even celebrate with champagne. I went for a walk. Through the old neighborhood, past the coffee shop where I used to take my one break on stressful Axis Tech days. Past the old office building, too. It looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how things shrink once you grow. One afternoon, I got a surprise LinkedIn message from Jim, my old team lead at Axis Tech. The one who used to call me Captain Reliability, who'd gone quiet the day I was let go. Jim S. "Hey Marcus. Just wanted to say. I should have spoken up when they pushed you out. It wasn't right. Hope you're doing well. Sounds like you are." I stared at it for a while. I didn't feel angry anymore. Or bitter. Just clear. I replied. "Marcus. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. We all learn at our own pace. Hope you're doing well too. No drama. No scorekeeping. Just closure. The next week, Keystroke Layer closed its seed funding round, $1.2 million from a small but thoughtful investor group led by a CTO I respected deeply. No venture sharks. No growth at all costs mandates. They wanted what we wanted, something that lasted. After we signed, Alex raised his coffee mug on our Zoom call. To resilience, he said. I raised mine. To systems that don't need heroes to keep running. That night, I told my kids the full story. They were old enough now to understand, the firing, the panic calls, the consulting comeback, the startup. My son asked, so, if they didn't fire you, would you still be working there? I paused, genuinely considering it. Yeah, I said. I probably would have stayed out of loyalty. He frowned. But then you wouldn't have started this. Exactly. He nodded slowly, piecing it together. Sometimes, I said, a closed door isn't a punishment. It's a shove into the right hallway. In October, we held our first in-person team retreat, small, casual, just a rented lake house and 3 days of whiteboarding and real food and real laughter. We didn't talk about KPIs or quarterly burn. We talked about impact. About the kind of company we wanted to build. About what kind of people we wanted to be, not just as engineers, but as human beings. There was no fake bonding. No icebreakers. Just respect. When I got home, I found an email in my inbox from Axis Tech's corporate account. Not Craig. Legal. Subject, System Rights Clarification Request. Dear Mr. Holloway. Our records indicate that elements of our legacy infrastructure still rely on frameworks and deployment pipelines developed under your previous employment. We would like to request access to certain archived versions of the infrastructure roadmap files and deployment recovery plans last accessed under your credentials. Please advise on availability for discussion. I laughed. They dug deep enough to realize the whole house was still standing because I'd built it on bedrock. I replied. Dear Axis Tech Legal. Thank you for reaching out. All relevant materials were properly transitioned at the time of my departure, per HR documentation. Any missing assets or dependency maps are the result of internal decisions made following my termination. I am not available for further discussion. Respectfully. Marcus Holloway, CTO co-founder. Keystone Layer. I clicked send. Then I deleted their email. For good. The architecture of freedom isn't built from code. It's built from boundaries. From lessons. From fire you walk through and refuse to forget. I used to think my legacy was the systems I built for other people. But now I know. My legacy is this. My team. My terms. My values. Everything else was just a draft. 1 year after Axis Tech let me go, I stood on a stage in front of 300 engineers at an independent tech summit in Denver. It wasn't some corporate-sponsored, VC-polished keynote. Just a gathering of builders, thinkers, people who had lived in the trenches of burnout and bureaucracy and were ready to create something better. My talk wasn't about scaling techniques or security protocols, though I could have spoken for hours on those. It was called The Value of Being Expensive. I told them my story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a transformation. I told them about the 18 years of loyalty, the sudden dismissal, the panicked callback. I told them how I learned that value isn't determined by how much you cost, but how hard it is to replace you. And I told them something I wish someone had told me earlier. If you stay in one place too long because you're afraid of what's out there, you'll forget how rare you actually are. The room was silent when I finished. Not out of politeness, but resonance. Then came the applause. Not explosive. Not forced. Just genuine. Measured. Real. After the talk, an older woman approached me, white curls, black hoodie, and the kind of calm that comes from having seen the cycles repeat for decades. First time I've ever heard someone talk about getting fired without bitterness, she said. I smiled. It took me a while to get there. You didn't sound like someone who lost, she said. I didn't, I told her. I just took longer to win. Back home, I updated my old laptop's desktop background, a simple quote I'd written on a napkin during my final week at Axis Tech, when everything felt like it was crumbling. A company can fire you. But they can't delete your impact. It had guided me through those first messy weeks. I didn't need it anymore. But I left it up, like a scar that no longer hurt, but still reminded me what I survived. Keystone Layer kept growing. Slow, deliberate growth, not the explosive, unsustainable kind. Our team stayed small, smart, and deeply connected. We became known not for shipping the most features, but for shipping what worked. What lasted. We weren't flashy. We were trusted. And that was enough. I still get the occasional message from former Axis Tech employees. Some ask for advice. Some just want to share where they landed. Some apologize for staying silent when I was let go. I always respond with kindness. Because I learned that most people aren't villains, they're just scared. Scared to speak up. Scared to leave. Scared to believe they're worth more than a monthly paycheck and Friday pizza parties. I don't blame them. But I won't be them. Not ever again. My son recently asked if I ever think about going back. To Axis Tech? I laughed. No. To working for someone else. I thought about it. About the steady paycheck. The built-in benefits. The illusion of security. No, I said. Because I'm not trying to be safe anymore. I'm trying to be free. He nodded like he understood, not fully, but enough. Then he said, I think I want to build something, too. That hit me harder than any applause I've ever heard. Because now I wasn't just shaping systems. I was shaping what comes next. Sometimes I still think about Craig. I imagine him in his office, juggling budgets, onboarding new recruits, chasing revenue targets that slip further each quarter. I don't hate him. In fact, I'm grateful. He was the pressure that cracked the shell. He didn't ruin me. He freed me. So here's what I learned. Loyalty is beautiful, but not if it costs you yourself. Experience compounds. Respect doesn't come from age, it comes from scars. And when someone tells you you're too expensive, it usually means they can't afford your worth. Let them go cheap. You go build.